Philadelphia, let me talk to you for a minute.
Please.
There's too much senseless killing going on.
Stop.
Yeah. Need y'all to take a walk with me. Take this walk.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Everything Philly
Tell the truth, I
Podcast,
live my feelings.
your
But am I
platform
really
for
if I don't speak on how I'm
information and
feeling?
entertainment,
Keep it
as
real,
well
I'm
as
sick and
hitting some
tired of all
hard
this killing.
topics.
Watching
My name
mothers
is
crying while
Sharice,
they
Yo,
burying their
Rob in the
children.
building.
We destroy it,
and today
but
we
it's
have a
nobody
special
rebuilding.
guest,
Fighting over
Miss
hoods when they
Nayo
don't even know the
Jones.
building. Claiming the
Nayo is
that's why
an
proudly claim my
educator,
children.
a
Dear
poet, and a
Philadelphia, this is how
musician.
I'm feeling.
So
Yes,
welcome,
ma'am.
Nayo.
Thank you for having me.
I call her Jonesy because I always jack up her name. It's spelled Nayo, but it's pronounced Nayo, so I just call her Jonesy.
Yes, ma'am. It's not an English name, so
So thanks again for coming. So our last few episodes, a couple different episodes, we've had some hard hitting topics, um, and got a lot of feedback from our viewers out there. And one of the topics in particular that has been really popular has been lifestyles, different people's choices of lifestyles, how they choose to live their lives, and how they go about maneuvering those differences in lifestyles with the judgments of other people and the stereotypes. And one thing that I noticed in those videos were that we got very little female perception. So today, I thought it was a great idea to bring Jonesy on just to get a female perception side of things for the dating scene, choices of lifestyles, different things like that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Ready? All right. Robbie, you want to start it?
Miss Jonesy gonna start it.
Yes, me. So one of our previous videos we did, it was daddy issues. This is the most recent one, and it was the clarity. And that came about when we were talking about decisions that people make and choices of lifestyle, who they date, whether it's same sex dating or whatever the case may be. And we had a lot of questions and didn't get quite the information that we felt like was needed. The last episode, if you watched it, the clarity shed a little bit of light on some things. But again, we didn't really get a female's perspective side of things. So we'd like to hear your story
Mhm.
and how your lifestyle decision, um, how it all came about. How have you been able to maneuver through society with stereotypes, with judgments, with acceptance, and still be still loving yourself, still happy, still being comfortable
Mhm.
and confident in those decisions.
Yeah.
If I say something.
Mhm.
Since we started shooting these episodes on this topic, I have been saying decisions, and people have been correcting me and saying it's not a decision for Moses. It's the way they was born. They was
Mhm.
born into that life. So
Mhm.
instead of saying decisions, what would be better?
For me, I typically tend to use the term identity, because it's not necessarily something that I decided to be. I think most people, if they were to decide to be something, it would probably be what would make them the most accepted in society. So it's something that is something that I was born as, but also that I identify with. So it's both um, something that just came along with my spirit, but also something that I made a decision to accept and move through life understanding about myself, if that makes sense.
So at what age did you understand what you was going through?
Pretty young, I kind of recognized that the way that I experienced attraction wasn't like a lot of the other people around me. Um, if we were playing house or whatever, I wasn't super strict on which role it was going to be. I had crushes on a couple of my friends when I was younger, but because I also grew up Christian, there was a lot of pressure from the outside about how you are supposed to feel, how you are supposed to live your life, who you are supposed to like. And as a really young kid, I didn't necessarily understand why it was that like who I thought was pretty was this huge existential problem. Um I was just a little kid who was like, she's pretty, I like her. And then it was the world that told me that is unacceptable, that is wrong. So for a lot of my life, up until I got to college, I very much suppressed myself. I told myself that I was just supposed to be who the rest of the world told me that I was supposed to be.
But just because you thought she was pretty at that age, I'm saying at the very first time or when you realized it and you thought she was just pretty, did that mean that you thought you was going to be gay? Or did you just think she was a pretty girl? Like,
I mean, when I was a really little kid, I had no concept of gay, straight, anything. I just knew who I wanted to be around, who I enjoyed spending my time with. It wasn't until I got older and then those concepts of like romance and relationships and all of those other things started to come into play when I realized that I didn't see my relationships happening the way that I saw them in the rest of society. Um, so like as a kid, you don't really look at yourself and be like, I'm a gay person all the time. You know who you like and you know who you want to spend time with. And then later, once relationships become a part of your developmental place, that's when you kind of start to think about, okay, what do I call myself? Or what is the world going to call me?
have you ever been with a man?
I have um mainly in like high school, a little bit of early college. So like I tried.
I mean, was that before or after you decide that you was going to follow what you felt in your heart?
Um Most of it was before. A little bit was after when I was like, okay, well, maybe I might be like bisexual. Let me see if that's something that like resonates with me. Um, and it didn't. So it was from then on that I was like, okay, if I recognize that like relationships with men do not work for me, I don't feel it. Let me go and try to see what actually does work for me. And that was when I tried to pursue more romantic relationships with women and found that like those were the places in which I was the happiest and the most fulfilled and where I felt genuine love.
Why? What was the difference? I mean, what was the difference that told you? What was the something that told you that it wasn't working with men? What was the uncomfortable feeling?
It was just the feeling of knowing that I just wasn't my full self, but also I just did not feel the genuine, like romantic feeling. I didn't feel the love. I didn't feel like the the want and desire to like have this person be a part of my life. Whereas when I experienced relationships with women, I was like, oh, I could see this being something that's long term. This makes me happy. This makes me feel that genuine sense of love and connection in my spirit and in my soul that like keeps me coming back to relationships with women.
So how was it? How was it coming out with it? Finally deciding to be
Um,
you.
the hardest part, honestly, was the acceptance within myself. I had a moment after I think it was like after my grandfather died, and I had that realization of, well, if my grandfather is in heaven now and he is seeing all things, that means that the thing I've been trying to hide so much is known already. And so from that point, I just decided like, well, one, life is entirely too short. You never know when you're going to leave this earth, and I would hate to be the person that leaves having not fulfilled my genuine like desires and purposes. Um, and so the recognition within myself was the most difficult part. And then I came out more socially. So like with my friends and around my sort of college sphere, um, I came out to my family absolute last. I actually came out to my dad on accident. I did not mean to do it. I was part of a protest with Janelle Monet, and they took a picture of me holding a sign that said "Black, Queer, and Still Here." Um, and so my dad saw the article and he was like, "What's this queer stuff?" And I was like, "Surprise! The rest of the world knew before you. Sorry about that." Um, but he was actually a lot more accepting then than he had been earlier in my childhood, which is the main reason why I didn't come out to him initially. Um, because he had said a lot of different things when I was younger that made me feel like I wouldn't be accepted. But I guess as he got older and kind of saw how the world was shifting, he eased up his mindset a little bit. And so when I did actually accidentally come out to him, he was a lot more accepting than I was anticipating.
So why was it that your family was the last?
I'm not particularly close with my family. There's just been a lot of circumstances and like childhood traumas and things like that that played a role in why me and my family aren't very close. I'm more of a person who has embraced chosen family. So my chosen family, which is my closest friends, were really the people that mattered the most to me at the time to show my true self to. Whereas my family, who I saw maybe once, twice a year, it didn't feel that important. Plus, there's a lot of my family members that are still like very evangelical Christian. And so I didn't want to open myself up to that potential of rejection. So I sort of, well, actually, technically, some of my family members I never truly told, but that's because we don't really talk. So if they know, they know. And, surprised if they don't.
So the biggest fear of coming out to not just your family, to anyone, is the fear of being rejected.
Absolutely.
And when it's rejection, meaning
Rejection meaning the judgment, meaning the um even just like outward like vitriol is the best that I can think of to describe it. I know for a lot of people the fear is of literal physical violence. Luckily that wasn't something that I was afraid of, but for me it was mainly just the idea of um the judgment and the connection and relationship being fully stripped away without my having a say in that, if that makes sense.
okay, so when you finally did it, was it as bad as you actually thought it was?
It wasn't because I mainly just told like my parents. Um, my more extended family, we've never had the conversation. I'm sure they know at this point. I don't hide myself in any sphere or realm. But I never gave them that conversation because we don't typically tend to have a lot of conversations anyway. And my point of view is that if you're not making an active if you're not actively trying to develop a stronger relationship with me, then there's no need for you to have access to this part of my life too, because you don't have access to any other part, if that makes sense.
Plenty. So is it fair to say that it's actually more easier now than it was when you was hiding it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, being in the closet, there's a lot of guilt that comes along with it. There's a lot of shame that's put on you from the world that sometimes you internalize. Um, and just a sense of not really being who you feel like you were placed on this earth to be. And so, in having come out and in existing as my full self and not hiding myself for anybody, um, it allows me to be the most authentic in my life than I think I've ever been.
The story sounds a lot like our last guest. It's like from the
Mhm.
beginning all the way to where we at now. Like the fear is within that burden that you hold in hiding for so long that you can't be yourself is the most hurting part. But once you let it out, it's like you're a free person, not free to do what you want to do, but free to be who you are.
Mhm.
Like and it wasn't nowhere as bad as you really thought it was going to be.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways I've also been extremely privileged in that way. There have been a lot of queer people whose experiences have not been nearly as easy as mine. There have been people who have experienced violence, people who have been put out of their homes. So I think the fear is genuine. I think for my particular case, it wasn't what my worst fears were. But I do think that for a lot of people, sometimes the biggest discomfort or fear does come from the outside because you don't know how people are going to react to you.
So the best way I see Deem to put it is though you actually have to talk to the person that you know has the most level head for the first time. And then maybe they can coach you on how to do it to the next, to whatever
Yeah,
the case may be.
absolutely. I think for anybody who is wanting to come out, the best advice I could always give is go to the person that you know is going to love on you the most. Because that is the most essential thing in the moment, is that you receive that love from the person that you are revealing yourself to. That's really all any of us want at the end of the day. People talk about an agenda all the time, but like really what it is like we just want to be loved and accepted for who we are. And so anytime somebody gets that, especially the first time that they come out to someone, I think it sets a whole different trajectory for your life.
But could that be the worst part of it too, because you really feel that for that person, but the fear of that person actually turning, and this is the biggest person that means the most to you. If that person turn on you, then what
Oh,
happens?
absolutely. I mean, sometimes the person that is going to love on you the most and the person who is most important to you aren't always the same person.
Right.
So it's beautiful and wonderful when that is the same person. But if it isn't, then for me, the solution would be say it first to the person who you know will affirm you, and then slowly take on the rest of the people if you know that they're not going to be as accepting. And I'm also a huge proponent of therapy. So if possible, address it with a therapist first.
I have just a couple more questions. You're kind of quiet over there,
No, I'm listening. You know, I'm always intrigued by stories.
so my next question would be: is it harder for a male to come out or a female?
I think it is different depending on what the other social factors are. I can't necessarily speak from a man's perspective because that's not the life that I've lived. Um, but I will say that they are definitely different. I think, particularly within our community, there is more um, outright rejection and sometimes violence towards Black gay men in particular. And I think for women, because there is this weird like fetishization of Black queer women, that it's not met as much sometimes with violence, but with an over sexualization of who you are,
Right.
or an idea that you are supposed to move and exist so that men can find joy or pleasure in what you are doing. And I think both can be dangerous, but in very different ways, if that makes sense.
Right. My last question: how old are you?
29.
Very young. So kind of takes away from my question
Well,
because I'm a I'm a lot older than you, and time has changed for me. Like you is not as open as it was when I was younger. So do you see the change at all? Like how accepted it is, and is it a lot more frequent to hear it now than it was back then?
I think in my short lifetime, I have noticed a big difference, at least in the way that conversations around queerness was had when I was a kid versus some of the conversations that my students have with each other, or sometimes they'll talk to me about it. I find that there are a lot more young people now that are comfortable coming out to their parents in like middle school. Even if they're not solidified on who they are, they're more comfortable saying, "Hey, I'm thinking or feeling these things," and they're more comfortable to have those conversations. Whereas when I was coming up, we were not talking to our parents about the ways that we were feeling. Most of us were terrified. Um, and so, even just in the last 10, 15 years, there has been a very big shift in people being a lot more open, having a lot more conversations, having more exposure to different kinds of people. Um, and I don't necessarily think that it's that more people are being gay now, but that it's more people are feeling accepted enough to voice who they are versus in previous generations where there was so much silence and taboo around it.
So people are being more open to just being themselves.
That's what I think it is.
That was my main question because it's like everywhere now. Like you'd be surprised who isn't
Right.
nowadays. So I'm wondering because most people say that it's not a choice, it's not a decision. We was born like this, but I can't see everyone being born like this because it is like the majority of people you run across right now is they don't even call themselves gay; they call themselves bisexual or whatever the case may be. And to me, it's all one group because I don't understand it all. But once you go with the same sex, I can't see how you can sit here and say you're still a male. I'm not a male, but you're still regular. I don't get that part.
I mean, I think it depends on your idea of what regular is.
Male and female.
I think for a lot of us, what we see as regular is what we've been exposed to for most of our lives.
Right.
Whereas for some people for whom this isn't new, or maybe kids who have queer parents, for example, their idea of regular and normal is that dad has a husband, or you have two dads, you have two moms, or whatever it is. So I think people's idea of regular and normal comes from what they've been exposed to for most of their life. And I think a lot of people are also coming to terms with the fact that like sexuality can be a bit more fluid than I think we have accepted in a lot of years. We're very used to putting people in very specific boxes. We give you this label, you are this thing, and you stay this way for your life. And I think a lot of people are finding that they don't fit as neatly within those boxes.
Why?
Because I don't think as human beings we're meant to be caged in. I think there's a lot of fluidity and nuance in the way that we as human beings move and exist in all of our realms. We're never the exact same person, the exact same moment at any given time. We're always changing and learning new things and evolving. And I think as we learn and change and evolve, we start to realize that some of those cages and boxes that we've been put into weren't because we decided that was the box that we were supposed to be in, but because we were put there. And so as we start to evolve in society, we start to break some of those down and just allow people to exist however they want to.
Okay. I keep hearing you use the word queer,
Mm-hmm.
and then the groups. Can you break down the letters
I can.
and what they mean? Because it's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember us having a conversation before when I'm like, what's the difference with this? Or what does that mean? So can you break those down?
I can. So L stands for lesbian. G stands for gay. It's gonna take me a minute. The B is for bisexual. The T is for trans. And then the Q is sometimes people say it's questioning. Sometimes people say it's queer. There's an I for intersex. A for asexual or aromantic. And for me, I'll just say LGBTQ plus, because to me the plus encompasses all of the things that are consistently being added on. But for me personally, I use the word queer. It is, for me, an umbrella term, but also a political identity. So because I say that I am queer, that means that I am existing in a space that is outside of what people consider to be the normal.
Can a male be a queer?
Yes.
I never heard that one.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, this is coming from a person who is not intersex, so always a grain of salt from a person who is not within that identity. But intersex people are people who are not always born with the same set of like chromosomes as what people would normally associate. So sometimes they might have multiple sets of genitalia, or sometimes they might have chromosomes that are different than the way that they present. I'm not the biggest expert on it. There are people who have done a lot of videos on their particular experiences, but they are people that do kind of fall in that in between and are not always as cut and dry, assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth.
So that's a medical thing
Mm-hmm.
that they're born with.
Yes.
When you talk about chromosomes,
Yes.
that's nothing you can do about that.
Exactly. I mean, there have been a lot of doctors that have tried. So, like, they'll do like a surgery on a baby without sometimes even consulting the parents.
But does that change anything? Because it's like DNA,
Chromosomally,
it's
no.
makeup. Yeah, so they'll still have those mixed feelings, or
It's a little bit different for every person because it is, chromosomes and hormones and all those different things. So I don't know if that there's ever one set way. I think the term just kind of allows for all the different ways that people's chromosomes and hormones can be set up in ways that are not always expected. Asexual, or sometimes aromantic. Ace is the kind of overall general term.
and what is that?
Something you're gonna hear me say a lot is it's a little different for everybody, right? But the term generally refers to, if you're asexual, people who experience sexual attraction in ways that are different than people who are what we have considered to be normal. So some people don't experience sexual attraction. Some people can only experience it if they have developed a really deep emotional connection. There's even ranges and spectrums within that, but it just generally refers to people who do not experience sexual attraction in the typical ways.
And
Physically?
you can be
Mhm.
how I said, if in a physical way they don't have those
They
emotions,
don't,
those
yes, for
feelings.
some people they don't have the urges. So like they don't. For some people they don't feel. Am I allowed to say horny?
Yes.
For some people they don't feel horny. For other people they might, but they just don't like the idea of it. It's a little different for everybody, but there are people for who they just do not experience the desire to have sex.
How do that fit into the
The letters.
letters?
That's
Because that
even a
could
little.
be a male feeling that way for a female, but just like mentally is the only way you can get aroused by being sexually attracted to
It
someone.
could be. There's conversations within the community, even sometimes around that. I think the thinking is generally because it is something that is outside of what is considered the typical, then it kind of goes within the umbrella where we also place people who are considered not typical.
Is that medical that they are not feeling? Because like that
I don't
attraction
know.
is natural.
I don't know if it's medical or if it's a. I'm gonna say this, it might be different for everybody.
Okay.
It might be. I don't know if it's a technically like medical term. Maybe more of like a psychological thing.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but that's something
So
for me
when
to look
those
into.
people don't have that attraction, then does that mean that they don't have relationships?
Some people do. I have, known people where they don't experience the physical desire for sex, but they still experience the desire for love and romance and with like romantic connection and emotional connection, just not necessarily always the physical. And there are even sometimes people who will still do the physical act with their partner because they know that's what their partner
Partner wants.
is wanting, but they don't always necessarily feel the need for it.
Okay.
Be 29 years old. You're well spoken on this topic.
Thank you. I've done a lot of research over the years. And also, I think being within the community, you meet a lot of different people, you hear their stories, and you hear of a lot of different experiences. So it's a combination of speaking with people within my community, but also noticing that there are a lot of things that I don't know and trying to make an active effort to learn those things so that I can be better in community with people.
By far the most informative.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
I mean, again, there are a lot of blind spots. Somebody's probably going to tell me that I'm wrong about a certain definition or certain understanding, and that is okay. Because I can only be an expert on my own experience, and I will always admit that I am still consistently learning.
Are you happy?
I am. I very much am. Outside of like the stereotypes and the judgment, to me, loving women is the most beautiful thing that I could experience. I mean, I think everybody can admit that women are phenomenal people.
Huh.
But there's just don't get in trouble with your wife now. I think there's just something really beautiful about being a person who is raised with the idea that you are supposed to nurture and being with another person who is also raised with the idea that you are supposed to nurture and being in a space where like both people are equally nurturing to each other. It just is a very soft place to land.
So are you in a relationship?
I am.
For how long?
Depends on when you consider us talking versus us officially dating. I generally tend to say 2, coming up on 3, maybe 2.5. 2.5 years.
Congrats. Congrats.
Thank you.
Happy for you. You seem like you're at peace.
I am. It's taken a lot of work to get here. A lot of therapy and a lot of trial and error and talking to myself in the mirror sometimes and, crying it out with my friends and trying to really figure out what life looks like for me. But every single bit of it is worth it.
Good. That was good. I knew you had a story to share. And it definitely was informative because I think that's one of the biggest questions is like, what are all those letters and what do they mean? Because it can get a little confusing, especially on the outside looking in.
Yeah. And I think that's also why, for me, I always just love the umbrella term of queer because it lets you kind of know in a sense of where to place somebody, but it also gives them the agency to place themselves within it.
It's the first time I ever heard someone sit there and say that.
Hmm.
Honestly, I never heard anyone admit to being a queer. Like in my wildest days, I would never sit here and say queer.
Yeah,
You're
because I mean,
queer.
it was a kind of a slur for a very
Yes.
long time.
Yes.
And I think that's what's so beautiful about reclamation. In the same way that people have the N word starts off as a slur, and then we turn it into something that we use for ourselves, and that I mean, for some people, is still something that they very much dislike and is very pushed away, and some people have embraced. I think it's a similar thing for queer. There are a lot of older folks within the gay community that very much do not like the word because it was used as a slur for them.
Right.
And then some of us who are of the younger generation are kind of taking it back and changing the power of it. So there's also differences within the community around that.
Like, thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. I love your transparency and your enlightenment. So thank you.
I mean, I'm an
Appreciate it.
educator. It's my life's purpose. So why not?
Thank you again. Well, viewers, if you have any questions, please make sure that you send them in. This is that platform that allows you to ask those questions. And if we don't have the answers for you, we'll find them. In the meantime, don't forget to like,
Share
comment,
and follow.
subscribe. Thank you.